This is a bombshell. Former Democrat campaign advisor Lindy Li has exposed the party from the inside out and the Obama-run establishment that she alleges puppeteered the entire past 4 years. But there's a lot more here to unpack, so take a look at this before I tell you more about it.
Who was running the presidency for the last 4 years? A lot of people say it was Obama's third term. There's rumors of, and these are friends of mine that are moderate Democrats say that they thought it was Elizabeth Warren running it. They thought it was Bernie Sanders running it. But I think the general consensus, I think if you asked, the majority of the population, I think it was Obama's third term.
It was for sure Obama's third term. I don't think that's even a question. I don't think it definitely was. And that's why you saw Obama fighting for his dear life. Why was he fighting so hard in the fall? Because he was fighting for his fourth term. He was fighting for his own legacy. The relationship between Obama and Biden is most reminiscent of that between LBJ and JFK. JFK had little respect for Lyndon B. Johnson, but he picked him anyway because he wanted to win the South. He wanted to win Texas. But he had very little respect for LBJ's intellect. JFK was surrounded by his Harvard brain trust, and he had immense disdain for LBJ's Texas Hill Country vibe. And that was the same attitude that Obama had towards Biden. Obama thought that Biden would eventually f everything up. And that's eventually actually what happened. Mm-hmm. So, but also he didn't have much faith in Kamala Harris. Before she ascended to the top role, he was vetting people like Mark Kelly and Andy Bashir. Most party chieftains didn't have Kamala Harris as their number one choice. But in the party of DEI, you can't skip a black woman. The optics would have been terrible.
Mm-hmm. And while this may not come as a surprise to you, it is a much scarier thought for the country. Is it any surprise then that America was practically skating on thin ice for 4 years with a president that allegedly couldn't even stay awake outside a 6-hour daily window, according to a report in June? Joe Biden's presidency was the host, and hundreds of political parasites had been feeding off of his presidential power. That includes a large number of entrenched bureaucrats and few puppet masters like Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Nancy Pelosi. Remember how near the end of his candidacy, Joe Biden was practically being wheeled around by Barack Obama on stage and during events? By the way, we were calling these out way before most other people, so make sure to subscribe to Millionaire Mentor for ways to get unfiltered truth at all times. But this keeps getting crazier because as we saw from Joe Biden's blanket pardons to his own family in the final hours of his presidency, Lindy Li alleged that it was the broader Biden family itself that had been leeching off of his power, including his convict son.
So I should also mention that after the debate, Hunter basically commandeered the White House. He sat in on all the White House top-level meetings. You had a former cocaine addict sitting in on the most sensitive meetings of the most consequential and important government in world history. Does that sit right with you?
No.
Without security clearance, mind you. No security clearance. That's who was basically running the show. So Hunter basically battened down the hatches after the debate to make sure that his father would only receive intel that he pre-approved.
What? This infuriates me like nothing else. We all know Hunter Biden's proximity to his father's office was meant to save himself, especially because there was no way he could escape allegations of corruption completely unscathed when records of his membership on the board of Ukraine and Chinese energy companies had come out. And that means it's hard to even call it a shadow presidency in any real sense, because it seems like no one was at the steering wheel of the country who wasn't just looking out for their shallow personal interest. And here's something that we should know about Joe Biden in hindsight of his entire 5-decade-long political career. It's not just the fact around his age and senility, but Joe Biden just isn't the kind of guy that's good for the number one position anyway. For most of his career, he's been a policy implementer more than a policy maker, and a follower more than a leader. But ironically, this is perhaps the exact kind of person that's a good front for control for the Democratic Party establishment, and then perhaps even his own family, including his wife, Dr. Jill Biden.
Jill Biden?
Jill Biden.
She was like president. She was president. I was with Joe and Jill the night of the debate. I was at their VIP debate watch party. I slept all the way to Atlanta, Georgia for that, to show my support. Oh my gosh, Sean, you wouldn't believe it. So that night, I have the pictures too. I was with Joe. And so Jill takes Joe by the hand. The names are so similar. I'm sorry. Jill takes Joe by the hand on stage and she's like, Joe, you knew all the facts. You answered all the questions. And you know that hand gesture that she does. And I'm thinking, you're treating him like a first grader. Like just because he, like you shouldn't applaud him for doing the basics. And you could just tell that she was fighting for dear life to hold on to the vestige of power. And just a few days later, she was on the cover of Vogue. So the whole thing was a Jill Biden show.
And honestly, weren't we seeing signs of that just in the few months of the Biden presidency? You would have been laughed out of the room for even implying this, but Jill Biden's creeping overreach into presidential affairs became painfully evident when she straight up posted a photo of herself on the president's chair on Air Force One, looking all busy going through documents for an important G7 meeting. Do you realize what that means? Being the First Lady's not an official position of authority. It's simply an honorary title for the wife of the president, and the fact that this family couldn't even pretend to recognize is a window into a sense of entitlement the Biden family had. But then a damning report from the Wall Street Journal came out in the final days of the last year after this election that Joe Biden was a senile and diminished president from the start, and everyone acted like they knew this all along. And when that came out, people realized that Mike Johnson was telling the truth when he claimed he couldn't even get the former president to recall an executive order that he had a few weeks prior. That is a scary thought, to say the least.
What about all the executive orders? Who was writing those up?
His senior advisors.
So they would just, all these different people, they weren't congregating with each other. There was no collective agenda.
There was this one time.
They were all out for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. There was this one time he signed an executive order and someone in the crowd was asking him about it the next day, and he would have no idea what they were talking about. So it's just, he just had immense trust in his senior staff to execute his mission.
You know what this reminds me of? Donald Trump once remarked that the presidency is the most powerful office in America, above the establishment, bureaucracy, and what deep state there may be. But that's only when the president is strong enough to hold that power. The office of the president, it's like a container of power and authority, and if it can't hold itself together, that power starts to leak around the president. That's exactly what America saw over the last few years, even though a significant section of the electorate realized it well too late. Let me know in the comments how you process all of this and share this across your social media to get a feel for what others are thinking. I believe that this past election was a public verdict on a stronger presidential office and a stronger president, and I think the results translated from the sentiment in a bottom-up manner over the last 4 years.